Welcome, impactful parents. I'm excited today. We have a very special guest. His name is Mark Lanning, and Mark Lanning is from the Safe to Tell organization. Now, if you are in Colorado, you might have heard of Safe to Tell. Safe to Tell is an organization that helps parents and teenagers and kids of all ages to be able to have an outlet to go and express their concerns when they have one. And Mark's going to talk a lot more about what that is. If you are not here in Colorado, there's going to be a similar type of organization likely where you live. So to have this kind of knowledge of what this kind of organization does and their belief system and just the services they provide is really an asset to anybody who has a school-age child, especially a tween or a teen. So welcome, Mark. Thanks for coming today.
Hey, thanks for having me. So the first section we have is on data. And so this is a tip category from last school year. We had 20,000 Safe to Tell tips, just short of 20,000 Safe to Tell tips statewide. Wow. Kids that chose to speak up on behalf of themselves or someone else. You can see here that suicide is by and far the number one category that kids report. And that's kind of consistent with a lot of the research and data that we know that young people are really struggling here in Colorado and across the nation with suicide. That ranges. People kind of ask sometimes, like, what's the outcome of that? And so that ranges from everything from, there's an urgent imminent risk and a student is hospitalized, to someone is just kind of maybe talking about it or like thinking about it and there's not an urgent risk. But we think that anywhere along that continuum is like a useful and a helpful intervention for a kid, right? We'd rather get a kid when they're really early and they're depressed and they're sad than before it becomes that they have a plan and then they're starting to carry out their plan. Then you can see drugs is number 2. We started for this year differentiating, and we have a separate category for vaping because I know a lot of parents and community members and us here at the Attorney General's office really wants to track that. But for this, that would be all sorts of drugs from marijuana to vaping. Bullying is number 3. Consistently that we see. And then you can see self-harm complaints are up there, and then school complaint is there. One thing that we've been sharing in our data for this year, the 1920 school year, is a category called duplicate reports. And so that actually is usually about number 2 or number 3. And what that means is if you have somebody who posts on their Instagram that says, hey, I'm thinking about suicide, and one person sends it into Safe to Tell, and someone sees that same post and sends it into Safe to Tell, it's 2 reports, but it's the same incident. And we view duplicate reports as a good thing because multiple students or tipsters in a community see something and decide it's their responsibility to speak up.
Yeah.
There are about 60 different categories to Safe to Tell reports. And so rather than trying to kind of memorize all of those different categories, our messaging is if you're worried about someone's safety and your desire is to protect, prevent, and help, kind of send it in rather than spending time educating kids and educating parents about, all the different warning signs for those things. There's a time and place for that, certainly, but we get anything and everything. We're kind of the one-stop shop that we want for it, that one phone number that people have to remember either for their friends at their school or other schools. We get tips for kids in other states, other countries. And so if kids don't know where to go with it, we want to be the ones that handles that and figures out where that needs to go. So this is some longitudinal data that we have. And so you can see here, this is by school year. And so you can see our number of tips consistently every school year increases. And we see that as a good thing, that more kids are choosing to speak up and say something. It's not really, may or may not be correlated with an increase in incidences. But you can see here this green spike. I'm kind of a data nerd, you'll have to forgive me. If your users aren't, they can just fast forward through this slide.
That's true.
But this little spike right here on this green, this was Parkland. And so you can see that we almost doubled the number of tips that we had that month. And then this spike right here, this was the STEM shooting. And then a lot of Colorado schools were closed. because a young woman from Florida who was obsessed with Columbine about that time came out here to Colorado.
I remember last year. Yes, absolutely. I just as my own contribution to this, as a teacher for many, many years, I notoriously don't like April. I feel like April is, I have said this for years, I'm glad to see data to prove my theory. April has always been a really hard month for teenagers, specifically teenagers. And it's that, it's the end of the school year. Things are really difficult, but just for those parents out there who do have tweens and teens, any adolescent really, that in April, if you see a decline in your child's mood and they get irritable and all the bad teenager traits that kind of tend to surface comes out in April, and with that, unfortunately, is oftentimes a shooting in our community.
Yeah. The other thing we'll see is kind of here in October. And as a former teacher, that's just a long month, like summer break's behind you. Winter break is a ways off. And so, we kind of see an increase in October as well. So this is safe to tell. So we were founded in, I'll show some data that shows that in a minute, but we were founded in 2004. We came out of a recommendation from the Columbine report that students knew things and didn't speak up. And then this is by no means an exhaustive map. There's not really a registry nationwide. And so if somebody lives in a state and there's a program, it's my apologies for that. But these states here do have similar statewide programs. And so if your constituents do live in one of these areas, they do have similar programs. They're not known by Safe to Tell, because that's only Colorado, but they have similar names and they're based on our program. A lot of school districts have also adopted similar anonymous reporting mechanisms. We do think and advocate that a statewide one is a little bit better, but certainly having a school-wide anonymous tip line is better than not having anything at all. I'm going to share with you, Kristina, these studies and documents. And again, if people are data nerds, they can go into them. But basically, Safe to Tell is specifically mentioned in all of these as a best practice. And so Arapahoe High School shooting in that top left there happened in 2015. And according to that report, there was at least 10 kids that had concerns that young man was a threat and didn't report it, right? And they had Safe to Tell posters and things, but the kids didn't internalize that message that I need to report it. And I don't need to worry whether it's real or not. That's the adult's job. I just need to report what I see and what I hear. And so some training from there for it. The Columbine Commission there in the middle, I already mentioned that, a recommendation from there. The one in the top right was basically came out of Parkland, a shooting. And that really, I think, prompted a lot of those other states to get tip lines. But again, Safe Tell is mentioned as a best practice. The one in the bottom left, if I was a parent and there's a lot of these things, I don't have a lot of time, that's probably the one that I would read of all the ones here. That is a study of all of the instances, basically from Virginia Tech through Parkland, around planned school attacks. And I'll get into some data in a moment pulling out from that. But I think the big one to keep in mind from there is that there's not really a profile for somebody who's a school shooter. Like stereotypically, you might think it's kids in trench coats or kids that are loners or, kids that are bullied or kids that don't have good grades in school. But this threw it all out the window. And it's every type of kid from the straight A student on has been a planned school attacker. And so what's really important for parents to know about this is in the threat assessment process, which is in the bottom right there, document, the school team is really looking at behaviors for students and not necessarily like reputation or that kind of thing. Like, what are the changes in behaviors, and are those behaviors related to attacks, and do they have the capacity to carry that out? And there's a whole theory with that around threat assessment that I want to get into, but that's kind of a reason why if there's even a concern that there's a threat with your student or other students, that they usually will put things on full stop and kind of do an investigation. And it's not because they don't trust you or don't trust your child. It's just that they need to look at kind of all the facts and kind of explore that. The one in the middle is Attorney General, who we're based out of, the Colorado Attorney General's office, relates to a school safety guide that has like survey questions on school culture and evidence-based programs and those kind of things. And so if you're interested in that, that'd be really great as a parent to ask for a social emotional curriculum that you have at your school, are they using something that's evidence-based, that's kind of proven to work for there?